The morning sun cast long shadows across the lunar observation deck, where Dr. Sarah Martinez sipped her coffee and watched Earth slowly rotate below. It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day where the biggest excitement came from tracking asteroid movements or calibrating deep space sensors. Sarah had no idea that in the next few hours, everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe would change forever. The first sign something was wrong came from the automated warning system. A sharp beeping sound echoed through the observation station, followed by a mechanical voice that made Sarah's blood run cold. Unknown objects detected. Multiple signatures. Distance outer solar system. Classification artificial. Sarah dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the metal floor, but she didn't notice. Her fingers flew across the control panel, bringing up the deep space scanner display. What she saw made her heart pound like a drum in her chest. Dots, hundreds and hundreds of tiny dots appearing on the screen like raindrops on a windshield. But these weren't asteroids or space debris. The computer was reading energy signatures, artificial materials, and movement patterns that could only mean one thing: ships. More ships than humanity had ever built in their entire history. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. Her hands shook as she activated the emergency communication system. "Control, this is Luna Station 7. We have a code black situation." "I repeat, code black," the response came immediately. "Luna 7, please confirm." "Did you say code black?" "Confirmed. We have multiple unknown vessels entering the solar system. Estimate, over 1,000 ships. They're big, really big." On Earth, Admiral Chen was in the middle of a boring budget meeting when the alert came through. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. At 63 years old, she had spent most of her career preparing for wars that never came. Now, as she looked at the display screen showing the incoming fleet, she realized all that preparation was about to be tested. "How long do we have?" she asked the young officer who had burst into the meeting room. "Based on their current speed, approximately 6 hours until they reach Earth orbit, Admiral." 6 hours. Chen felt a strange calm settle over her. After decades of military service, she had learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Send out the recall signal. I want every ship, every fighter, every piece of military hardware we have moving toward Earth within the hour." "Admiral, our entire fleet is only 212 ships. The incoming force appears to be at least 5 times that size." Chen smiled grimly. "Then we'll have to be 5 times better, won't we?" Meanwhile, on the flagship of the approaching fleet, Admiral Vextar stood before a massive viewing screen showing the small blue planet ahead. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and forearms that moved in precise, calculated gestures. His species, the Zephyrians, had conquered 47 worlds in the past century. Earth would be number 48. "Status report," Vextar commanded in his native language, which sounded like wind chimes mixed with the hiss of escaping gas. "All ships in formation, Admiral. Energy shields at maximum. Weapon systems charged. The primitive inhabitants appear to be mobilizing their fleet." Vextar made a sound that was the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. "How many ships do they have?" "Approximately 200, Admiral. All of inferior design and technology. 200. Vextar shook his head. "The species of Kepler 442b had 3,000 ships when we conquered them. These Earth creatures are even more pathetic than our intelligence suggested." The Zephyrian Empire had developed a very simple approach to conquest. They would arrive at a planet with overwhelming force, demonstrate their technological superiority, and demand surrender. Most species chose to submit rather than face complete destruction. Those that resisted usually lasted no more than a few hours. Earth, Vextar was certain, would follow the same pattern. As the alien fleet drew closer, humanity's response became more frantic. Space stations emptied as personnel evacuated to Earth or the underground bunkers on Mars. Civilian ships fled toward the outer planets. Military vessels converged on Earth like antibodies rushing to fight an infection. Captain Jake Morrison was 28 years old and had never seen real combat. He piloted a fighter called Ghost Protocol, a sleek black ship that was more engine than anything else. As he flew toward the rally point near Earth's moon, he tried to keep his hands steady on the controls. "All fighter squadrons, this is Admiral Chen. Form up behind the capital ships. We're going to make these bastards work for every inch." Jake had grown up reading stories about space battles and alien invasions. In those stories, humanity always found some clever way to win against impossible odds. Looking at the scanner display showing the massive enemy fleet, he wondered if real life would be as kind as fiction. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel just outside Earth's orbit. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Massive ships shaped like silver crescents hung in space, their hulls gleaming with an inner light. Energy fields shimmered around them like soap bubbles made of electricity. They were clearly the product of a technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. On Earth, every television, radio, and internet feed carried the same image: the alien fleet hanging above their planet like a storm cloud of metal and energy. People gathered in the streets, in their homes, anywhere they could watch the sky. Some prayed, some cried, some simply stared in wonder at proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. Admiral Vextar activated the communication system that would broadcast his message to the entire planet below. He had given this speech 47 times before, and the words came easily. Inhabitants of the third planet of the Sol system, I am Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our empire. You have one planetary rotation to consider our terms. Surrender unconditionally, and your species will be preserved as workers and servants. Resist and face total extinction. The message was broadcast in perfect English, Chinese, Spanish, and every other major human language. The Zephyrians had been watching Earth for months, learning their languages and studying their technology. To them, humanity looked exactly like every other primitive species they had conquered. On the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiance, Admiral Chen listened to the ultimatum with no expression on her face. Around her, the bridge crew waited for her response. Some looked scared. Others looked angry. All of them looked to her for leadership. 24 hours, Chen said finally. They're giving us 24 hours to surrender. What are your orders, Admiral? Asked her second-in-command, Captain Torres. Chen stood up from her command chair and walked to the main viewing screen. Earth hung below them, blue and white and beautiful. Humanity's home. The planet where her grandchildren were probably watching the sky and wondering if they would see another sunrise. Signal all ships, Chen said. We're not surrendering. We're not running. And we're sure as hell not going down without a fight. Admiral, they outnumber us 5-1. Their technology is clearly superior. Maybe we should consider what? Chen turned to face her crew. Consider letting some alien empire turn our children into slaves? Consider giving up our freedom because the odds are bad? She shook her head. I've got news for these Zephyrian bastards. They picked the wrong species to mess with. As word of Admiral Chen's decision spread through the human fleet, something interesting happened. Instead of despair, a strange energy began to build among the crews. It wasn't confidence. They all knew they were probably going to die. It was something else. Something deeper. It was stubbornness. The same quality that had driven humanity from caves to cities, from sailing ships to starships. The refusal to give up, even when giving up was the smart thing to do. Jake Morrison felt it too as he checked his fighters' weapons systems. The plasma cannons were fully charged. The missile pods were loaded. The ship's AI was running perfectly. It wasn't much compared to the massive alien vessels, but it was his, and he was going to use it to show these invaders that humans didn't scare easily. All pilots, this is Squadron Leader Davis. Remember your training. Stay in formation. Watch each other's backs. And if you get a chance to take one of those alien ships with you, don't hesitate. The Zephyrian fleet began to move into attack formation. Their ships spread out across Earth's orbit like a net closing around the planet. Energy readings spiked as they powered up weapons that could probably crack a moon in half. Admiral Vextar studied the human fleet through his ship's sensors. 200 small ships arranged in a defensive formation. It was almost touching, really. Like watching children play with toy soldiers while real warriors approached. Shall we begin the attack, Admiral? Asked his weapons officer. Not yet. Let them consider our offer for a few more minutes. Perhaps they will see reason and surrender. But Vextar was wrong about one thing. The humans weren't considering surrender. They were considering something else entirely. Admiral Chen opened a secure channel to all ship commanders. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know how this is going to end. But before it does, I want these aliens to remember something. I want them to remember that when they came to Earth, they met something they weren't expecting. She paused, looking at the faces of her captains on the communication screen. They expected to find another primitive species that would roll over and play dead. Instead, they found humans. And humans don't quit. Humans don't surrender. And humans sure as hell don't go down without taking some bastards with them. A cheer went up from the bridge crews across the fleet. It wasn't the sound of people celebrating victory. It was the sound of people who had chosen to fight, win or lose. All ships prepare for battle. And remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting to show the universe what humanity is made of. The stage was set. Above Earth, two fleets faced each other across the void of space. One was massive, technologically advanced, and confident of victory. The other was small, outgunned, and should have been terrified. But as the Zephyrian weapons began to charge with deadly energy, Admiral Vextar was about to learn something that 47 conquered worlds had never taught him. He was about to learn that sometimes, the most dangerous opponent is the one who refuses to lose. The first shots of the war came without warning. Admiral Vextar had grown tired of waiting for the humans to see reason. With a simple gesture of one of his forearms, he gave the order that he expected would end the conflict in minutes. Open fire. Target their largest vessels first. The Zephyrian flagship's main cannon powered up with a sound like thunder, rolling through metal corridors. Energy crackled along the weapon's length as it built up enough power to vaporize a mountain. Similar weapons on dozens of other ships did the same, creating a light show that painted the darkness of space in brilliant colors. The beams lanced out across the void, moving at nearly the speed of light. They struck 3 human cruisers before anyone could react. The ships didn't just explode, they simply ceased to exist, turned into expanding clouds of glowing gas and twisted metal. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Chen watched 300 of her people die in an instant. The tactical display showed the cruiser's signals simply vanishing, leaving empty spaces where proud ships had been moments before. "Damage report," she said, her voice steady despite the sick feeling in her stomach. "We lost the Chicago, the Berlin, and the Tokyo, Admiral. No survivors detected." Chen nodded grimly. She had expected casualties, but seeing it happen was different from imagining it. 3 ships, 3 crews, gone in the blink of an eye. "All ships scatter and attack," she ordered. "Don't give them easy targets." But the human fleet didn't scatter the way Vextar expected them to. Instead of fleeing or forming defensive positions, they did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. They charged. 200 human ships, outgunned and outclassed, accelerated directly toward the massive Zephyrian fleet. Their engines burned bright blue-white as they pushed their ships to maximum speed, racing toward an enemy that could swat them aside like insects. "What are they doing?" asked Vextar's tactical officer, staring at the display in confusion. I don't understand, Admiral. Their formation makes no sense. They're flying directly into our firing solution." Vextar studied the human ships with growing bewilderment. In 47 previous conquests, he had seen species try many different tactics. Some built massive defensive fortifications. Others attempted to negotiate. A few tried to run, but none had ever simply charged headlong into a superior force. "Perhaps they're attempting some kind of suicide attack," suggested the weapons officer, "though I fail to see how such small ships could damage our shields." "Continue firing. Destroy them before they can reach our formation." But the Zephyrians quickly discovered that hitting the human ships wasn't as easy as they had assumed. The smaller vessels were fast and maneuverable in ways that the massive alien ships weren't. They weaved between energy beams, rolled away from missile strikes, and used their size advantage to dart between the larger Zephyrian vessels. Leading the charge was Captain Jake Morrison in his fighter, Ghost Protocol. Jake had never been in real combat before today, but he flew like he had been born for it. His ship twisted and spun through space, dodging weapons fire that should have turned him into cosmic dust. "Come on, you alien bastards," Jake muttered as he lined up his targeting system on a Zephyrian destroyer. "Let's see how you like a taste of human hospitality." He fired everything he had. Plasma cannons, missile pods, even the ship's emergency flares. Anything that might scratch the paint on the alien vessel. Most of his shots splashed harmlessly against the energy shields, but a few got through, leaving dark scorch marks on the enemy hull. It wasn't much damage, but it was enough to get their attention. Suddenly, Jake found himself the target of every weapon on the Zephyrian ship. Energy beams crisscrossed the space around him as the aliens tried to swat the annoying little fighter. But Jake had learned to fly in the asteroid fields around Mars. where a moment's inattention meant becoming part of the landscape. Dodging alien weapons was just another day at the office. "Ghost protocol to all fighters," Jake called over the radio. "These guys shoot like stormtroopers. Keep moving and they can't hit us." Across the battlefield, other human pilots were discovering the same thing. The Zephyrian weapons were devastatingly powerful, but they were designed to fight other massive ships, not swarms of small, fast targets. It was like trying to kill flies with a sledgehammer. Admiral Vextar watched the tactical display with growing frustration. His ships had destroyed 12 more human vessels, but the rest were swarming through his formation like angry hornets. Worse, they were starting to target specific systems on his ships. "Admiral, they're attacking our sensor arrays and communication relays," reported the tactical officer. "They seem to know exactly where our weak points are." "How is that possible? Our ship designs are classified at the highest levels." What Vextar didn't know was that humanity had been watching and learning. For months, Earth's deep space telescopes had been studying the Zephyrian ships, analyzing their energy signatures and structural designs. Human engineers had identified vulnerabilities that the aliens didn't even know they had. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Vengeance, led a coordinated attack on a Zephyrian battlecruiser. Her ship and 5 others focused their fire on a single point, the junction where the energy shields connected to the main power grid. "All ships, concentrate fire on the shield generator," Santos ordered. "Let's see how tough they are without their energy umbrellas." The combined firepower of 6 human ships wasn't enough to punch through the alien shields by brute force, but concentrated on a single weak point, it was enough to cause a feedback loop in the shield matrix. Sparks flew from control panels on the Zephyrian ship as its protective barrier flickered and died. "Shield failure on the enemy cruiser," reported Santos's weapons officer. "She's naked. All ships, pour it on. Show them what happens when you pick a fight with Earth." The unshielded Zephyrian ship tried to maneuver away from the attacking humans, but it was too late. Human weapons, primitive as they were, still packed enough punch to damage unprotected alien hulls. Explosions bloomed along the cruiser's flanks as missiles and energy beams found their mark. For the first time in the battle, a Zephyrian ship was seriously damaged. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. One of his cruisers was venting atmosphere and showing multiple hull breaches. The primitive humans had actually managed to hurt one of his ships. "How many casualties?" he asked. 17 dead, 43 injured on the Sword of Victory, Admiral. They're requesting permission to withdraw for repairs. 17 dead. In all of Vextar's previous conquests, he had never lost a single crew member. The inferior species they conquered usually couldn't even scratch the paint on Zephyrian ships, let alone kill trained Imperial Navy personnel. "Permission denied. All ships, close formation and concentrate fire. I want these humans eliminated." But concentrating his formation played right into Admiral Chen's hands. She had been watching the battle unfold, studying the alien tactics and looking for weaknesses. The Zephyrians fought like they expected to win through superior firepower alone. They had no experience dealing with an enemy that refused to play by the rules. "All ships execute pattern Sierra 7, Chen ordered. "Let's show them what humans do when we're angry." Pattern Sierra 7 was something the human fleet had practiced for years but never used in actual combat. It was based on the hunting tactics of ancient human ancestors, the pack strategies that had allowed early humans to bring down prey much larger than themselves. The human ships split into small groups and began attacking the Zephyrian formation from multiple directions at once. Like wolves surrounding a mammoth, they darted in to strike at weak points, then retreated before the enemy could respond effectively. "They're everywhere at once," reported Vextar's tactical officer, his voice rising with stress. "Every time we target one group, another attacks from a different angle. Impossible. Primitive species don't have the coordination for multi-vector attacks." But what Vextar was seeing wasn't advanced technology, it was advanced evolution. Humans had spent millions of years learning to hunt as a coordinated pack. Those same instincts that had allowed their ancestors to survive on a dangerous planet were now being applied to space combat. Captain Torres, commanding the heavy cruiser Indomitable, found himself in perfect position to demonstrate just how dangerous human pack tactics could be. His ship and 3 others had maneuvered behind a Zephyrian dreadnought, while the alien crew was distracted by attacks from the front. "Target their engines," Torres ordered. "If we can cripple their mobility, they're sitting ducks." Human missiles slammed into the alien ship's drive systems, causing massive internal explosions. The dreadnought lurched to one side as its engines failed, leaving it spinning helplessly in space. "Direct hit on enemy drives," reported the weapons officer. "She's dead in the water." But Torres wasn't done. Instead of moving on to another target, he did something that shocked both his own crew and the aliens watching. "All ahead full. Ramming speed." "Sir?" The helmsman's voice cracked with surprise. "Did you say ramming speed?" "You heard me. If we're going down, we're taking some of these bastards with us." The Indomitable accelerated toward the crippled alien ship, her engines pushed beyond their safety limits. The human crew braced for impact as their ship became a guided missile weighing thousands of tons. The collision was spectacular. The Indomitable struck the Zephyrian dreadnought amidships, her reinforced prow punching deep into the alien hull. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire and twisted metal that could be seen from Earth's surface. Admiral Vextar watched the destruction with something approaching shock. The humans had just deliberately destroyed one of their own ships to damage his. It wasn't a desperation move. It was a calculated tactical decision. "Admiral," his communications officer said, his voice shaking, "we're receiving a message from the human fleet commander." "Put it through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen. She looked calm, almost serene despite the battle raging around her. "Admiral Vextar, I presume. I wanted to thank you for the demonstration. Now we know your ships can be hurt. We know your shields can be brought down. And we know you bleed. Your resistance is futile, human. Surrender now and minimize your casualties." Chen smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "You still don't get it, do you? You came here expecting to fight another species like the ones you've conquered before. But we're not like them. We're human. And humans have been fighting impossible odds since we learned to sharpen sticks. Your primitive weapons cannot defeat the Imperial Navy." "Maybe not. But we don't need to defeat your entire Navy. We just need to make you realize that conquering Earth is going to cost you more than it's worth." The transmission cut off, leaving Vextar staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. For the first time in his military career, the Admiral wasn't sure what those orders should be. The battle continued to rage around Earth's orbit. More ships on both sides were damaged or destroyed. But something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrians had come expecting an easy victory against a primitive species. Instead, they found themselves locked in a desperate fight against an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous with every passing minute. And in the depths of space, Admiral Chen prepared to show them that the battle had only just begun. The battle had been raging for 3 hours, and Admiral Vextar was beginning to understand that something was very wrong with his calculations. By now, the human fleet should have been completely destroyed. Instead, they were still fighting with a ferocity that defied everything he knew about inferior species. On his tactical display, the situation looked like chaos. Human ships darted between his formations like angry insects, striking at weak points and retreating before his gunners could respond. Worse, they seemed to be learning and adapting with each attack. "Status report," Vextar demanded. "We've lost 4 ships completely, Admiral. Another 12 are severely damaged. The humans have lost 37 vessels, but their remaining ships are fighting more effectively than when the battle began." Vextar's 4 hands clenched into fists. Losing 4 ships to a primitive species was unthinkable. In previous conquests, he had never lost more than a few crew members to accidents or equipment failures. How is this possible? Our intelligence reports indicated that this species had never fought a space battle before today. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this kind of fight their entire evolutionary history. Every human alive carried the genetic memory of millions of years, spent as both predator and prey on a world that tried to kill them. Daily. Captain Jake Morrison demonstrated this perfectly as he led his squadron through another attack run. His fighter, Ghost Protocol, had taken damage from near misses, but he kept flying with the same stubborn determination that had once driven his ancestors to hunt woolly mammoths with nothing but sharpened spears. Blue Squadron. "Follow my lead," Jake called over the radio. "We're going to thread the needle on that big bastard." The big bastard was a Zephyrian super dreadnought, easily 10 times the size of any human ship. Its hull bristled with weapons and shield generators, making it look like a mobile fortress. Any sane pilot would have avoided it completely. Jake flew straight at it, His fighter screamed through space at maximum acceleration, dodging the massive energy beams that tried to swat him out of existence. Behind him, 11 other human pilots followed his insane flight path, trusting him to lead them through the deadly maze of alien weapons fire. At the last possible second, Jake rolled his fighter and dove beneath the super dreadnought's hull. The other fighters followed, skimming along the alien ship's underside where its weapons couldn't target them effectively. "Now!" Jake yelled. 12 fighters opened fire at point-blank range, their weapons focused on a single section of the enemy hull. The concentrated firepower punched through the armor plating, exposing the ship's internal structure to the vacuum of space. "Secondary explosions detected," reported one of the pilots. "We hit something important." The super dreadnought shuddered as internal systems failed. Emergency lights flickered along its hull as damage control teams rushed to contain the breach. It wasn't enough to destroy the massive ship, but it was enough to send a message. Humans could hurt anything if they were willing to get close enough and take enough risks. Admiral Chen watched the attack from her command ship with grim satisfaction. Her people were fighting better than she had dared to hope, but she knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Zephyrians still had overwhelming numerical superiority, and human ships were being destroyed faster than they could inflict serious damage on the enemy. She needed something to tip the balance, something the aliens wouldn't expect. "Signal all ships," Chen ordered. "Execute Protocol Omega." Her tactical officer looked confused. "Admiral, Protocol Omega isn't a combat maneuver. It's a contingency plan for—" "I know exactly what it is," Chen interrupted. "Do it." Protocol Omega was humanity's last resort. It had been developed by military planners who understood that Earth might someday face an enemy too powerful to defeat through conventional means. The protocol involved activating every experimental weapon, every prototype system, and every classified technology that humanity had been developing in secret. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, automated systems began to wake up. Research facilities that had been dormant for decades suddenly came online. Scientists who had been told their projects were too dangerous or too expensive received emergency authorizations to deploy everything they had built. Dr. Elena Vasquez was one of those scientists. She had spent 15 years working on experimental weapons in an underground laboratory beneath the Sahara Desert. Her specialty was kinetic warfare, using simple physics to deliver devastating amounts of energy to a target. "All systems online," she reported to Admiral Chen via secure communication. "Railgun batteries are charged and ready." "What's your maximum effective range, Doctor?" "At full power, we can put a tungsten rod anywhere in near-Earth space. The projectiles will be moving at 12% the speed of light when they hit." Chen smiled for the first time since the battle began. "Target the largest enemy ship and fire when ready." The railgun installation was hidden beneath what looked like an ordinary sand dune. When it fired, the electromagnetic pulse was visible from orbit as a brilliant flash of blue-white light. The tungsten projectile, no bigger than a telephone pole, streaked through space at 40,000 kilometers per second. It hit the Zephyrian flagship dead center. The projectile punched through the alien ship's shields like they weren't even there. The exotic matter that made up the energy barrier simply couldn't react fast enough to stop something moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rod continued through the ship's hull, vaporizing everything in its path and creating a perfectly round hole that went from bow to stern. Admiral Vextar felt his ship shudder as something passed completely through it. Emergency alarms blared as sections of the flagship lost atmosphere and power. "What was that?" he demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. We detected a massive kinetic impact, but our sensors couldn't track the incoming projectile. It was moving too fast." "Too fast? How fast?" "Approximately 12% light speed, Admiral." Vexitar stared at his tactical officer in disbelief. "That's impossible. No primitive species has that kind of technology." But even as he spoke, more flashes appeared on the planet's surface. More tungsten rods streaked through space, each one moving fast enough to punch through any known defense. The Zephyrian formation began to spread out as ships tried to avoid the devastating kinetic strikes. "They're firing projectiles at relativistic speeds," reported the science officer, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "The energy requirements for such weapons should be beyond their industrial capacity." What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humans had a different relationship with technology than most species. Where other races developed advanced energy shields and exotic weapons, humans had focused on making simple things work better. A tungsten rod fired at 12% light speed was just a very, very advanced version of throwing a rock. Captain Santos, commanding the Vengeance, saw the effect the railgun strikes were having on the enemy formation and decided to press the advantage. Her ship had taken heavy damage, but her crew was still fighting with the desperate energy of people defending their home. "All remaining ships, form up on the Vengeance," she broadcast. "We're going to punch through their center line while they're distracted." What followed was one of the most desperate charges in human military history. 43 damaged human ships, many of them barely holding together, accelerated directly toward the heart of the Zephyrian fleet. They flew through a storm of energy weapons that turned space itself into a deadly maze of intersecting beams. But the humans had advantages the aliens were only beginning to understand. They were smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than the Zephyrian ships. More importantly, they were willing to take risks that no rational military commander would consider. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, piloting the damaged frigate Relentless, found herself on a collision course with a Zephyrian heavy cruiser. Her ship's engines were failing, her weapons were offline, and her life support was running on emergency power. Instead of trying to avoid the collision, she aimed for it. "This is for Earth." "You alien bastards," she whispered, as she pushed her engines past their failure point. The Relentless struck the Zephyrian cruiser at full ramming speed. Both ships disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire as their reactors went critical simultaneously. The explosion was so bright it briefly outshone the sun, sending shockwaves through both fleets. Admiral Vextar watched another of his ships die and felt something he had never experienced before in all his years of conquest: doubt. The humans were fighting with a suicidal intensity that defied military logic. They seemed willing to sacrifice anything, including their own lives, to inflict damage on his fleet. "Admiral, we're receiving multiple communications from our ship commanders," reported his communications officer. "They're requesting permission to withdraw and regroup." "Withdraw? From a primitive species?" "Sir, we've lost 8 ships and nearly 2,000 crew members. The enemy's tactics are unprecedented. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach." Vextar looked at the tactical display showing the ongoing battle. His fleet was still larger and more technologically advanced than the human force. By any reasonable measure, he should be winning decisively. But reasonable measures didn't account for an enemy that used their own ships as weapons. They didn't account for kinetic projectiles fired at relativistic speeds. And they certainly didn't account for a species that seemed to become more dangerous the more desperate their situation became. On Earth's surface, people gathered around television screens and computer monitors, watching the battle unfold in the skies above their planet. They saw their defenders fighting against impossible odds, saw human ships burning in space, saw brave men and women sacrificing their lives to protect their home. But they also saw something else. They saw the alien fleet in disarray, saw enemy ships burning and retreating, saw the invaders who had expected an easy conquest learning that humans didn't surrender. In cities around the world, spontaneous celebrations began to break out. Not because humanity was winning, the outcome was still far from certain, but because they were fighting. Because when faced with extinction, the human race had chosen to stand up and throw a punch. Admiral Chen felt the mood shift through her fleet as reports came in from Earth. Her people weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for every human who had ever lived, for every child who deserved to grow up free, for the simple principle that no one had the right to enslave their species. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say." Her voice carried across the fleet, reaching every human pilot and crew member still fighting in the void. "These aliens came here thinking we were just another primitive species to be conquered. They thought we'd roll over and surrender when faced with superior technology. But they made a mistake. They picked a fight with the descendants of persistence hunters, with the children of a species that survived ice ages, plagues, and predators by refusing to give up." She paused, looking out at the stars where her people were dying to protect their world. "Today we show the galaxy what humans are made of. Today, we prove that some species can't be conquered because they literally don't know how to quit. All ships, prepare for final assault. Let's finish this." The surviving human fleet began to regroup for one last desperate attack. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and many of their ships were barely functional. But they had something the Zephyrians were only beginning to understand. They had the absolute, unshakable conviction that they would rather die fighting than live as slaves, and that conviction was about to change the course of galactic history. The tide of battle was about to turn. Though neither Admiral Chen nor Admiral Vextar fully understood how dramatically things were about to change. Admiral Chen's final assault began with something the Zephyrians had never encountered before: psychological warfare on a species level. As the remaining human ships formed up for their attack, they began broadcasting something across all frequencies that made the alien crew stop and listen in confusion. It was music, not just any music, but humanity's greatest war songs. The battle hymn of the Republic mixed with "We Will Rock You," ancient Celtic battle chants blended with heavy metal anthems. The sound of a species that had been fighting for survival since they first learned to make fire. "What is that noise?" demanded one of Vextar's tactical officers. "It appears to be some form of audio transmission, Admiral. The humans are broadcasting it on all channels." Vextar listened to the strange sounds for a moment. To his ears, trained on the harmonious wind chime music of his own people, human war songs sounded like chaos given voice. But there was something unsettling about them. Something that spoke of a species that had turned conflict into an art form. "Jam their communications," he ordered. "We've tried, Admiral. They're broadcasting on so many frequencies simultaneously that we can't block them all." The music wasn't just for show. Admiral Chen had studied the psychological profiles of the enemy species, and she knew that the Zephyrians valued order and harmony above all else. Their entire military doctrine was based on precise formations and coordinated attacks. The chaotic sound of human war songs was designed to disrupt that sense of order. Captain Jake Morrison, still flying his battered fighter through the maze of alien ships, found himself grinning as, thunderstruck by AC/DC blasted through his headphones. "Now this is more like it," he muttered, rolling his ship through a barrel roll that brought him in behind a Zephyrian destroyer. "Time to show these aliens how humans party." His remaining weapons opened fire, adding to the symphony of destruction that was building around Earth's orbit. But Jake wasn't just firing randomly. He and the other human pilots had learned something important during the battle. The Zephyrians were predictable. Their ships moved in precise formations. Their weapons fired in calculated patterns. Their defensive maneuvers followed standard military doctrine. It was efficient, logical, and effective against any enemy that fought by the same rules. Humans didn't fight by those rules. All fighters, "Execute Pattern Chaos 7, Jake called over the radio. Pattern Chaos 7 wasn't in any military manual. It was something the fighter pilots had improvised during the battle. A formation that had no formation, an attack pattern that followed no pattern. Each pilot flew independently, striking where the enemy least expected it, retreating along routes that made no tactical sense. To the Zephyrians, it looked like complete disorder. To the humans, it was the organized chaos of a pack hunt. Captain Santos, commanding what was left of the Vengeance, led the capital ship assault. Her destroyer had lost half its weapons and most of its armor, but her crew was still fighting with the desperate energy of people who had nothing left to lose. "Target their command ship," she ordered. "If we can take out their admiral, maybe the rest will think twice about this invasion." But as the human ships closed in on the Zephyrian flagship, something unexpected happened. The alien formation began to shift and change in ways that surprised even Admiral Chen. The Zephyrians were adapting. Admiral Vextar had finally begun to understand what he was facing. These humans weren't just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something entirely different. Something his military training hadn't prepared him for. "Signal all ships," he commanded. "Form defensive circle around the flagship. Concentrate all firepower on the incoming human vessels." It was a sound tactical decision. By clustering his ships around the command vessel, Vextar created overlapping fields of fire that should have been impossible for the humans to penetrate. He had forgotten one crucial detail about his enemy. Humans specialized in doing the impossible. Admiral Chen saw the Zephyrian formation change and smiled grimly. The alien admiral was learning, but he was learning the wrong lessons. He was trying to fight humans the way he would fight any other species. "All ships prepare for close quarters combat," she ordered. "We're going in." What happened next would be remembered in military academies for generations to come, assuming humanity survived to build military academies. The human fleet didn't try to break through the Zephyrian defensive formation. Instead, they flew directly into it. Captain Morrison led the charge, his fighter screaming through the gap between two alien battleships at a speed that should have been suicidal. Behind him, dozens of other human ships followed, diving into the heart of the enemy formation like bullets fired into a crowd. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting at ranges their weapons weren't designed for. Their massive energy cannons couldn't target enemies that were practically touching their hulls. Their missiles couldn't arm themselves before striking targets that were only meters away. "They're inside our defensive perimeter," reported Vextar's tactical officer, his voice rising with panic. "Our ships can't fire without hitting each other. How is this possible? No species would risk close-quarters combat in space. It's tactically insane, but Admiral Chen wasn't insane. She was human. And humans had been fighting at close quarters since they first picked up rocks to defend themselves from predators. Captain Torres, commanding the heavy cruiser Indomitable, demonstrated this perfectly as he brought his ship alongside a Zephyrian battlecruiser. Instead of trying to maintain distance and trade fire, he ordered his crew to do something that shocked both fleets. "Prepare boarding parties. We're going over there." "Sir?" His first officer stared at him in disbelief. "You want to board an alien ship? These aliens think they can invade our home and enslave our people. I think it's time we return the favor." The Indomitable extended its docking clamps and forcibly connected to the Zephyrian ship. Hull-cutting charges blew through the alien armor plating, creating a breach large enough for human marines to pour through. What followed was the first hand-to-hand combat between humans and aliens in recorded history. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez led the first wave of Marines through the breach. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had grown up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit and had learned to fight before she learned to read. The Zephyrian crew members she encountered were tall, graceful beings with 4 arms and pale blue skin. They moved with fluid precision and carried energy weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. They had never faced an opponent like Rodriguez. The sergeant ducked under the alien's energy beam and tackled him around the waist. Both figures went down in a tangle of arms and legs, but Rodriguez came up on top. Her combat knife found the gap in the alien's uniform, and blue blood spilled across the deck plates. "Ugly bastard," she muttered, then moved on to the next target. Behind her, more Marines poured through the breach. They fought with weapons that were primitive by galactic standards, bullets and blades instead of energy beams and plasma charges. But they fought with a ferocity that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Admiral Vextar received reports of the boarding action with growing horror. "They're inside the Blade of Honor, Admiral. Hand-to-hand combat on decks 7 through 12. Our crew is. They're not responding well to close-quarters fighting." "What do you mean, not responding well?" "Sir, our people have never fought this way before. These humans seem to enjoy physical combat. They're using primitive weapons, but they're using them very effectively." Vextar tried to understand what he was hearing. The Zephyrian Empire conquered worlds through technological superiority. Their military doctrine was based on precise strikes from safe distances. The idea of boarding enemy ships and fighting with knives and bullets was barbaric. It was also working. The Zephyrian crew members were taller and stronger than humans individually, but they had no experience with the kind of brutal, close-quarters fighting that came naturally to a species that had evolved from persistence hunters. Sergeant Rodriguez and her Marines moved through the alien ship like a virus through a body. They didn't try to hold territory or follow conventional tactics. They simply spread out and caused as much damage as possible. "Rodriguez to Indomitable," she called over her radio. "We've reached their reactor room. Want me to do something nasty to it?" "Negative, Sergeant. We want to capture this ship, not destroy it." "Copy that. How about their bridge?" "That's a go. Take their command center and see if you can convince their captain to surrender." Rodriguez grinned. "My pleasure." The fight for the Zephyrian bridge was brief but memorable. The alien officers tried to defend their command post with energy weapons and tactical superiority. But they were fighting an enemy that had learned warfare in the streets and alleys of Earth's toughest cities. Rodriguez kicked down the bridge door and dove to one side as energy beams scorched the air where she had been standing. Her rifle chattered as she put 3 round center mass into the nearest alien. The Zephyrian went down with a look of surprise on his face. "Anyone else want to dance?" Rodriguez called out, her rifle trained on the remaining bridge crew. The Zephyrian captain raised his 4 hands in surrender. News of the successful boarding action spread through both fleets like wildfire. For the humans, it was proof that they could fight the aliens on any terms. For the Zephyrians, it was a shock that undermined everything they thought they knew about warfare. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display showing one of his ships under human control. In 300 years of Imperial expansion, no enemy had ever successfully boarded a Zephyrian vessel. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission from the captured ship." "Put it through." Sergeant Rodriguez's face appeared on the screen. She was covered in blue alien blood and grinning like a wolf. "Hey there, Admiral Ugly. This is Sergeant Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Force. I wanted you to know that your ship's captain has agreed to discuss terms for ending this invasion. Seems he's not too happy about humans running around his ship with sharp objects." Vextar felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You will release my ship immediately, or I will destroy it with all hands aboard." "Go ahead," Rodriguez shrugged. "You'll be killing your own people along with mine. But that's your choice. We humans are used to dying for what we believe in." The transmission cut off, leaving Vextar staring at a blank screen. Around Earth's orbit, the battle continued. But something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrians had come expecting to fight a primitive species with inferior technology. Instead, they found themselves locked in combat with an enemy that turned every disadvantage into a weapon. Humans were smaller and weaker individually, so they fought in coordinated packs. Their ships were less advanced, so they used them as guided missiles. Their weapons were primitive, so they got close enough that primitive weapons could be effective. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy fighting. Every tactical challenge made them more creative. Every setback made them more determined. Admiral Vextar was beginning to realize that he had made a terrible mistake. He had assumed that all species were like the ones the Empire had conquered before. Rational beings who would surrender when faced with superior force. Humans, it turned out, were not rational. They were something far more dangerous. They were stubborn. And as the battle raged around Earth, that stubbornness was about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The final phase of the battle began when Admiral Vextar made what he believed would be his decisive move. With one of his ships captured and his formation in chaos, he decided to deploy the Zephyrian Empire's ultimate weapon. "Activate the planet killer," he ordered. A massive ship at the center of the alien formation began to glow with an ominous red light. The vessel was 3 times larger than any other ship in the fleet, its hull covered with exotic energy projectors designed for one purpose: turning entire worlds into lifeless rocks. "Admiral Chen," her tactical officer called out, "we're detecting massive energy buildup in the enemy superweapon. They appear to be targeting Earth directly." Admiral Chen felt her blood turn to ice. She had known this moment might come, but seeing it happen was different from imagining it. The aliens were preparing to destroy her entire planet. Time until they can fire? Estimate 12 minutes until the weapon reaches full charge. 12 minutes. Not enough time to evacuate Earth. Not enough time to mount a conventional attack on the massive ship. But maybe enough time for something completely insane. "Signal all remaining ships," Chen ordered. "We're going to ram that thing." Her bridge crew stared at her in shock. The planet killer was protected by the strongest shields in the Zephyrian fleet and surrounded by dozens of escort vessels. Any attack would be suicide. "Admiral," her first officer said carefully, "that ship is heavily defended. We'd never get close enough to cause significant damage." Chen smiled grimly. "Who said anything about getting close? We're going to use their own weapon against them." Her plan was so audacious that it took several minutes for her staff to understand what she was proposing. The planet killer's energy beam would need to pass through Earth's orbital space to reach the planet's surface. If they could position the right ship in the beam's path at the exact right moment. "You want to intercept their own weapon?" asked Captain Torres. "Not intercept, redirect. The Defiance has been taking a beating, but our deflector array is still functional. If we can position ourselves in the beam's path and angle our deflectors correctly, you'll turn their planet killer into the galaxy's largest mirror," Torres finished, understanding dawning in his voice. It was a plan that required perfect timing, incredible precision, and the kind of desperate courage that only humans seem to possess. Chen's ship would have to fly directly into a beam that could vaporize planets, hold position long enough to redirect the energy, and hope that their deflector array could handle forces that would tear apart most ships. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In 10 minutes the enemy is going to fire a weapon capable of destroying Earth. We're going to stop them, but I won't lie to you about the odds. This is a one-way mission. She paused, looking around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They looked scared, but they also looked determined. Any crew member who wants to transfer to another ship has 5 minutes to do so. No questions asked, no shame involved. You signed up to defend Earth, not to fly into the mouth of hell. The bridge was silent for a long moment. Then her tactical officer spoke up. With respect, Admiral, where exactly would we transfer to? Every other ship in the fleet is just as likely to get blown up in the next few minutes. A chorus of agreement echoed around the bridge. Chen felt a surge of pride in her people. They were scared. Any sane person would be. But they weren't backing down. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison was leading the remaining fighters in desperate attacks on the Planet Killer's escort ships. His Ghost protocol had been patched back together with spare parts and determination, but it was still flying. All fighters, concentrate on the destroyers around the big ship, Jake called over the radio. We need to clear a path for Admiral Chen. The fighter attack was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Human pilots flew through formations that should have been impossible, dodging energy beams and missile barrages while pouring fire into the enemy escorts. They couldn't destroy the massive ships, but they could confuse them, damage their sensors, and draw their attention away from the Defiance. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, flying a replacement fighter after her ship was destroyed earlier in the battle, found herself in a head-to-head duel with a Zephyrian ace pilot. The alien's ship was faster and better armed, but Kim had something her opponent didn't expect. She was completely insane. Instead of trying to outmaneuver the enemy fighter, Kim flew straight at it in a game of chicken that would determine which pilot had stronger nerves. At the last possible second, the Zephyrian pilot broke off, giving Kim the opening she needed to put 3 missiles into his engine compartment. "Scratch one alien ace," she called out as the enemy fighter exploded. Aboard the Planet Killer, the weapons charging sequence continued. Exotic matter swirled through containment fields, building up the energy needed to crack a planet's crust. The ship's commander, Admiral Krexnall, watched the process with satisfaction. "Time to firing?" he asked. 6 minutes, Admiral. The weapon will be ready to discharge on your command. Krexnall had destroyed 17 worlds during his career. Each one had been a quick, clean execution. A single beam that ended all resistance in seconds. Earth would be no different, but as he watched the tactical display, something bothered him. The human fleet was still fighting, even though they knew their planet was about to be destroyed. Most species would have surrendered by now, hoping to save at least some of their population. Humans just kept attacking. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet is concentrating their assault on our escort ships. They appear to be trying to clear a path to our position." "Impossible. They know our shields can't be penetrated by their primitive weapons. Nevertheless, sir, they're making a coordinated attack run. Their flagship is leading the charge." Krexnall studied the display more carefully. The human admiral was flying directly toward his ship, ignoring the devastating fire from the escort vessels. It looked like a suicide run, but there was something about the approach vector that seemed deliberate. "What is their exact course?" he asked. "They appear to be positioning themselves directly in line with our targeting beam, Admiral." A cold realization settled over Krexnall. They're going to try to block the shot. It was an insane plan, even by human standards. The Planet Killer's beam would vaporize any ship that tried to intercept it. But as he thought about it more, Krexnall began to understand the true audacity of what the humans were attempting. They weren't trying to block the beam. They were trying to redirect it. "Signal Admiral Vextar immediately," he ordered. "Tell him the humans are attempting to turn our own weapon against us." But it was too late for warnings. Admiral Chen had already begun her final approach. The Defiance screamed through space toward the Planet Killer, her hull glowing from the heat of multiple energy strikes. Around her, the last of the human fleet provided cover fire, their weapons bright sparks against the darkness. "Deflector array charging," reported the ship's chief engineer. "We're pushing the generators beyond their design limits, Admiral." If this doesn't work, we'll all be dead anyway," Chen replied. "How long can we maintain deflection?" "Maybe 30 seconds before the array overloads and takes half the ship with it. Then we'd better make those 30 seconds count." The Planet Killer's weapon reached full charge, just as the Defiance moved into position. The massive energy beam lanced out from the alien ship, bright enough to blind anyone looking directly at it. For a moment, it seemed like the human ship would simply be vaporized. The beam struck the Defiance's deflector array with the force of a small star, energy that could crack continents washing over the small vessel. But instead of destroying the ship, something impossible happened. The beam bent. The Defiance's deflector array, pushed far beyond its design limits, managed to redirect the planet-killing energy back toward its source. The reflected beam struck the alien superweapon with its own devastating power. The result was spectacular. The planet killer, designed to dish out unimaginable destruction but not to receive it, simply came apart. Its exotic matter containment fields failed. Its hull cracked like an eggshell, and its reactor went critical in a chain reaction that lit up half the solar system. Admiral Krexnull had just enough time to realize what had happened before his ship exploded around him. The humans had done the impossible again. They had turned the Empire's ultimate weapon against itself. The destruction of the planet killer sent shockwaves through both fleets, but for different reasons. The humans cheered as they realized their homeworld was safe. The Zephyrians stared in horror as they watched their most powerful weapon destroy itself. Admiral Vextar felt something break inside his mind as he watched the impossible unfold before him. In 300 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like what these humans had just accomplished. They had taken a weapon designed to kill planets and used it to kill the ship that fired it. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet commander." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen. Her ship was burning and her uniform was torn, but she was smiling. "Admiral Vextar, this is Admiral Chen. I believe you wanted to discuss surrender terms?" "Surrender?" Vextar's voice cracked. "You are the ones who should be surrendering. My fleet still outnumbers yours. Look around, Admiral. Look at what we've done to your superior technology. Look at your burning ships, your captured vessels, your destroyed superweapon. Then ask yourself a simple question. Is conquering Earth really worth what it's going to cost you?" Vextar did look around. He saw the tactical display showing dozens of damaged ships, the reports of casualties mounting by the minute, the demoralized faces of his crew. For the first time in his career, he was losing. "We could destroy your entire fleet," he said. But even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe, probably. But how many more of your ships would we take with us? How many more of your people would die? And what would you tell the next species you try to conquer when they ask you what happened at Earth?" Chen leaned forward, her eyes hard as steel. "You'd have to tell them that you fought a species that refused to surrender, that you met humans, and word would spread through the galaxy about the people who turned your own weapons against you, who boarded your ships with knives and bullets, who used their own vessels as guided missiles." She paused, letting her words sink in. "How many species do you think would surrender to you after hearing that story, Admiral? How many would choose to fight instead, knowing that if humans could hurt you, maybe they could too?" Vextar felt the weight of her words settle over him like a shroud. The Zephyrian Empire's power wasn't just based on superior technology. It was based on the belief that resistance was futile. The humans had shattered that belief. Even if he destroyed every human ship, even if he turned Earth into a lifeless rock, he couldn't undo what had already happened. The galaxy would know that the Empire could be hurt, could be made to bleed, could be fought. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. "Simple, you leave. You don't come back. And you spread the word to every other empire out there that Earth is off limits. In return, we won't hunt down your damaged ships or try to capture more of your technology. And if we refuse," Chen's smile turned predatory, "then we finish this fight. Right here, right now. Your fleet against what's left of ours. And when the smoke clears, whoever survives gets to explain to their superiors why they lost a war against a primitive species." The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship was silent as Vextar considered his options. He could continue the fight and probably win, but at a cost that would cripple his fleet and damage the Empire's reputation forever. Or he could retreat and live with the knowledge that he had been defeated by a species that shouldn't have been able to tie their own shoes, let alone fight a space battle. "Signal all ships," he said finally. "We're withdrawing." The retreat of the Zephyrian fleet was unlike anything in galactic history. The massive armada that had arrived expecting an easy conquest limped away from Earth with nearly half their ships damaged or destroyed. Behind them, the small human fleet watched them go, battered but unbroken. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her crippled flagship and watched the alien ships disappear into faster-than-light travel. Around her, her crew began to cheer, but she felt too tired for celebration. "Admiral," her communications officer said, We're receiving messages from Earth. The whole planet wants to thank you. Chen nodded wearily. Tell them we just did our job. Nothing more, nothing less, but even as she said it, she knew that wasn't quite true. They had done something more than their job. They had announced humanity's presence to the galaxy in a way that would never be forgotten. Within days, news of the battle spread through interstellar communication networks. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. A primitive species called humans had fought off the Zephyrian Empire's invasion fleet, turned their own weapons against them, and sent them running. For the first time in galactic history, a species had faced the Empire and won. Other civilizations that had submitted to Zephyrian rule began to whisper about rebellion. Species that had never fought back started to consider resistance. The Empire that had ruled through fear and superior technology suddenly found their authority questioned across dozens of worlds. And at the center of the solar system, on a small blue planet, humanity went back to their daily lives with the quiet satisfaction of a species that had proven they belonged among the stars. They had faced the galaxy's greatest empire and refused to bow. They had turned disadvantage into advantage, weakness into strength, and certain defeat into impossible victory. The galaxy now knew what humans were capable of when they were pushed into a corner. They were capable of anything.